Welcome to the World of Eora, a news and lore podcast about Pillars of Eternity and Avowed, as created by Obsidian Entertainment. I'm your host, Eric, aka Gingerino. Thank you all for listening. Let's get into today's lore. Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of the World of Eora. I'm your host Eric, aka Gingerino. Thanks everyone for joining me today on another episode as we dive into the history, lore, and game mechanics of Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2 as we gear up for the release of Avowed. For those who are new to the show, welcome to the show, happy that you're here. The reason that we focus on the Pillars of Eternity universe as well as the Avowed universe is because it's actually just the same universe. It's the world known as Eora. And so as the theory goes, if we dive into Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2, we can glean some insights off of those games and their narratives before Avowed releases and just have a better, more nuanced appreciation for Avowed when we play it. Now, of course, Obsidian has stated that you don't need to play those games or know about the stories there in order to enjoy Avowed, so this show is obviously not any level of mandatory listening, but for those of you who just like to learn more about the world you're going to play in, or you're just a big Pillars of Eternity fan and you want to learn more about the world or revisit some areas that you have fond memories of, welcome to the show. Happy to have you here. Today we're going to be talking about Inquisitor Lödwyn, who is the fire-eyed lady from the trailer, if you're not familiar, if you happen to be new to this show. The June trailer that was it June 9th, I think, for the Xbox Games Showcase, we saw a trailer for Avowed, the story trailer, and at one point in time, there was this woman wearing a mask, and she had fire eyes when she spoke. And that character is actually someone that we see in a previous Pillars of Eternity game, the second one, and her name is Inquisitor Lödwyn. Now, we don't actually know a ton about her, even though you do get to interact with her. She's considered a minor NPC in that game, but she is associated with a Paladin order known as the Steel Garote, who is also associated with the Empire of Aedyr, which is where your player character from Avowed comes from. As well, that is the Steel Garotte, are also associated with one of the gods of Eora, known as Woedica. And so even though I've touched on a lot of this lore in previous episodes, a lot of this will actually be coming from an episode number 20, I believe, the one on the goddess Woedica. If you want to hear a little bit more about her and also touching on today's information, you can go listen to that episode as well. But that's mostly what we're going to be talking about today, is Inquisitor Lödwyn, the Steel Garotte, a little bit about Woedica, and perhaps some ideas about what their roles are going to be in Avowed, at least based off of what we have so far. It felt fitting to do this episode today because this is one of the things that people will have seen in the mass audience of people that have seen the trailers for Avowed, and even though a lot of people know who Inquisitor Lödwyn is if you've already played the game and you've been paying attention on Reddit, I still think that it was worth doing an episode just talking about her and where she comes from and the people she's associated with. Not a lot of news to go over today. The only piece of news that I think is really new is that I think we have confirmed that there is an ability in the game called Arduous Delay of Motion, which I got from watching Carrie Patel talk with, who was it? I can't remember. I think Ortis put something on Reddit recently where she was talking to a host that was also talking to another developer with Age of Mythology. I don't know why it's escaping me. Anyways, at one point in time, they asked her about some stuff she was doing in the game, and she was talking about how she got Yatsley, one of the companions in the game, to cast Arduous Delay of Motion, which is a ability that we see from the Pillars of Eternity games. So not only is it interesting that we get to see that ability return in Avowed, but also that our companion can cast it, so I wonder how many abilities our companions are actually going to have. But that's the closest thing to news I have for you. There are a few other news articles out on different gaming journalist websites, but largely speaking, they are saying the same things that I have already reported on, and I've already pointed you in the direction of other news articles. So it seems like Obsidian is kind of just casting a really wide net with a lot of the similar information for like what Avowed is and stuff that we've already talked about, which makes sense, right? Like you want to get as many people as possible with the same information, so there's not a lot of conflicting stuff, and just the story is set, everyone knows what's being said, and all that kind of a thing. So it makes sense that that's what they're doing. Seems pretty standard issue to me. So other than a few other extra news articles that all say the same thing, there's really not a lot to talk about today. So I think we're just going to dive straight into today's lore.
I'm curious. What exactly did you find there?
So we're going to start off with Inquisitor Lödwyn, because that is the character that we see in the story trailer, as I already mentioned. It's a woman who wears a interesting mask and has fire red eyes whenever she speaks. And as mentioned previously, she is a minor character in Pillars of Eternity 2 Deadfire. She appears in a quest called Lost Dues and Good Faith, although you can run into her beforehand accidentally, as a lot of people, such as myself, did when you were just exploring the world. As you explore the world, you find underground places and hidden temples and all that kind of a thing. And I stumbled upon Inquisitor Lödwyn way earlier than I was supposed to. And I believe she smacked me up and down when I first met her. So I ended up having to kind of come back and deal with her. I'm not going to spoil anything that comes from that quest or how it goes. That's not what we're going to be talking about today. I will say, though, that Inquisitor Lödwyn in the Pillars of Eternity 2 game is a character that you, the player character, can choose to kill or not to kill. And that's, I'm not relating that to spoilers of the quest. It's just you can kill a lot of people in the game just because you feel like it. Okay. Either way, it's interesting to see that she is making a return in Avowed, because there's one of two things going on there. Either Obsidian is canonizing that she survives whatever it is the Watcher may or may not have done in that interaction that they have, or they are finding a way to justify that she may have been killed but somehow came back to life, which certainly isn't out of the question. Obviously, in a fantasy world, things like that can happen, but it is also not a very common occurrence that people just die and come back to life. Being associated with the goddess Woedica might help a little bit, and perhaps we can touch on that a little bit later. But suffice it to say, it's interesting to see this minor character who we really, again, know nothing about come back into Avowed, especially considering that she is probably someone that most people killed. I can't remember a long time ago who did it. There was a statistical survey of like, what kind of characters do most gamers play? You know, across the board between hardcore and casual. You take the entire massive collection that is gamers. You know, a lot of these games have feedback that you have, that whenever you connect to the internet, it relays choices that you've made in games or something like that. Apparently, it turns out a lot of people play hero styles. A lot of people play styles where they go against the bad guys, as it were. And I could see a lot of people approaching Inquisitor Lödwyn the first time and interpreting her actions as evil or bad. And perhaps in her aggression, maybe they killed her. So I surmise that a lot more people killed Lödwyn than did not kill them. So the fact that Obsidian is bringing back the character that probably most people killed is, I don't know, it raises a lot of interesting questions for me in terms of what happened with her. Then again, I don't actually have the data, technically speaking. Maybe Obsidian does, and they're like, yeah, it turns out most people didn't kill Lödwyn. They thought, oh, she's a cool mask lady, we're just going to keep her. So I don't know. I don't know what it is they decided, but either way. So here, I'm going to read all the lore that we have for you regarding Inquisitor Lödwyn. Is this one paragraph on the Pillars of Eternity fandom website. She is the head of a Steel Garotte detachment at the Oathbinder's Sanctum. The Inquisitor runs a court of Woedica, trying would-be Oathbreakers, or those just that the cult would consider Oathbreakers, in keeping with the beliefs of Woedican faithful. The Inquisitor is a fanatic to the bone, and attempts to reason with her are a forlorn hope for anyone who is not a member of the Bleak Walkers. All this to say is that she is part of a Paladin order known as the Steel Garotte. We'll get into Paladins in a second, and the Steel Garotte right after that. But she's part of this Paladin order that really holds contracts and oaths as sacred. And basically what they do is they hunt down people that they call oathbreakers, people who have broken contracts or that they have considered to break a contract, and they put them on trial, for lack of a better word, which is essentially to say that they probably put them down. You know, it's punishable by death by these people. And anyways, Inquisitor Lödwyn is considered a fanatic within this already extremist group of people known as the Steel Garotte. And that's really all we know, is that she's kind of the leader of this little contingency of Steel Garotte Paladins, and that they are currently working on a contract, is what I'm going to put it as. And you interact with her, and you kind of either agree, disagree, or are neutral with her, and depending on how you want to do things, you may or may not get in combat with her, or align with her and help her out, that kind of a thing. It's a very minor quest, very interesting side quest, where it really introduces you to the Steel Garotte Paladin Order. Now, shifting to Paladin orders just a little bit here. Paladins are martial zealots within the world of Eora. They usually are martial zealots in pretty much every kind of fantasy setting. Like if you've played D&D, they can be martial zealots or religious zealots. usually of the martial variety. They are often the people that we would see head to toe knight armor, and they have their holy symbol emblazoned on the chest of their armor. They have a big sword and a big shield, and in the name of their god or whatever it is that they stand for, they go forth and smite the unbelievers or the heretics or the communists. I don't know. It depends. Maybe it's a political thing. But yeah, so that's kind of the idea of what a paladin is, and paladins exist in the world of Pillars of Eternity and therefore Avowed as well. Paladins can come together under the banner of a deity, under a philosophical idea, under a government, under a contractor, if that's what if they're like mercenaries or something like that, an ideal. Really, they can come together for anything, and they are bound by these oaths. When they're bound by these oaths, this is kind of like, this is your lifestyle now, this is who you are. Obviously, some Paladin orders will let you leave and come back in some senses, but the idea is that when you're a Paladin, you are deep into whatever it is that they place their banner under. For the Steel Garotte, they heavily align with the goddess Woedica. Woedica being the goddess of rulership, laws, justice, and vengeance, amongst other things. And there is a really powerful idea behind Woedica, which is the idea of oath breakers and oath binders. So Oathbinder might sound familiar to those of you who have been keeping up with Avowed news for the last few years. The very first trailer that released, those runic symbols that were on that sword at the very end, the climax of that trailer, those runic symbols spell out the word Oathbinder. And one of the names of the goddess Woedica is, in fact, Oathbinder. And there's a lot of theories going around that perhaps you, your character, are an Oathbinder of sorts. Not a god, of course, but like that you are a person who has the title of Oathbinder in perhaps a Woedican army or something like that, which might be associated with the Aedyr Empire, since the Aedyr Empire and the Church of Woedica are highly tied together. So the Steel Garotte very much so takes seriously this idea of holding true to your oaths. And so whenever they catch word of someone who was in a contract and then broke out of that contract, or just didn't follow through with it, they hunt these people down and they kill them. I think typically they would probably kill them by choking, either by hand or using an actual garrote, which I believe is the instrument where you have a wire between two things that you hold on to. So basically you wrap the wire around their neck and you choke them out. This is a pretty consistent thing that we see within Woedican worship. Not that people choke each other in Woedican worship, I guess, but more that apparently the choking oath breakers and non-believers in the Woedican world is kind of how you go about doing it. I'm not sure. I can't remember why it's choking, why that happens to be the thing. It might have something to do with like the intimacy between you and that person. Like you have to get up into their face. It's not something you do from afar. You're looking into their eyes or something like that. You could read into it a lot. I don't really know. I'm not going to speculate too much here because that's not the focus of it. So that's who the Steel Garotte is. They are this paladin order that unite under the goddess Woedica, and they hunt down oathbreakers. And they're a very fanatical and extremist group. I don't know how fanatical the contingency that we will see in Avowed is. And really, I don't really know how radicalized Inquisitor Lödwyn is because we don't actually get to interact with her a ton. I know I didn't. I was one of the people that killed her. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens with her. But this is Inquisitor Lödwyn, and that is the Steel Garotte group that she is a part of. The only little bit more of lore that we can get about Inquisitor Lödwyn is a bloody note that we can find in the Second Pillars game that was written by her to another person. And the only thing this gives us is a little bit of flavor of her personality. So she writes this letter, and it says, "Dangerous creatures have made this sacred place their home." This sacred place is referring to the Oathbinder's Sanctum. It's a temple that they are held up in. That's where you actually find them in the game. "If it is Woedica's will that they remain, it is not our place to disturb them. Further, remember that we are not here as looters. Anyone caught thieving will meet the Strangler's justice. Let Cudwina's death be an example to you all. Signed, Inquisitor Lödwyn." The Strangler's justice. The goddess Woedica, I think sometimes referred to as the Strangler. Her manifestation that can appear in the world is referred to as the Strangler, I believe. I'm going to have to go back and listen to episode 20 of my own so I can catch up on some of this stuff. But again, the Strangler being the idea of like that's the punishment for oath breaking. So the Strangler probably being Woedica. You'll meet her justice. You'll meet its justice. As in, if you loot this place that we are in, this holy site that is Oathbinder's Sanctum, then you will suffer the consequences. So it sounds like she holds Woedica in high regard. It's not just the idea of fighting Oathbreakers, it's also that she is probably a religious person as well. Now, before we move on from the Steel Garotte Paladin Order, there's one thing that I want to read here on the Pillars of Eternity fandom. Now, I do want to point out that the source for this has since been deleted, so I can't actually look up the source for this lore, but the person who did originally cite it found it in Josh Sawyer's Twitter feed. So the tweet has been deleted. So I will point out that don't know if the following little story or anecdote, whatever you want to call this, is canonized as actually something that happened or not, but I still think that it's pretty interesting. It's called Think Upon Your Promises and Die, the Litany of the Steel Garotte. Ideally employed for those who have broken oaths, paladins of the Steel Garotte have been known to use this litany against a wide variety of opponents when they feel it is appropriate, which the litany being Think Upon Your Promises and Die. While it works perfectly well on a battlefield, the Order prefers for it to be used from stealth, so the victim hears the words of the litany just before a garrote tightens around their neck. A hagiography? A hagiography? I don't actually know what word that is. A hagiography in the Church of Woedica tells of Unfric Calicer, an Aedyran paladin who took vengeance upon the infamous traitor to the imperial crown, Malden Gower. Malden had survived many attempts on his life before he escaped to the safety of Gran Valia, where he believed he could not be touched. When Unfric finally penetrated Malden's defenses, he spoke the litany and slipped the garrote around his neck, but his quarry proved too tough to kill. Unfric repeated the litany, and still Malden would not succumb, but stumbled to the parapet of his tower, overlooking a rocky seashore below. Guards rushed to Malden's aid and were only moments away from pulling Unfric off of his neck, as their body plummeted towards the rocks. The guards swore they heard Unfric repeat the litany a third time, refusing to let go or prepare his body for the impact. Though a search party did recover Malden's body, Unfric's was never found. The Aedyran Church of Woedica concluded that their queen had transported his body out of the physical world. In recognition of his dedication and martyrdom, they canonized him as Saint Unfric of the Three Maledictions, a patron often invoked by the paladins of the Steel Garotte. And before I say anything else, the title, Saint Unfric of the Three Maledictions, sounds like something straight out of Blasphemous 1 or 2. If you played either of those games, it just sounds really something. I actually think that something like that might actually be in the game. I don't remember. Anyways, so this tells a story of Unfric, one of the paladins of the Steel Garotte, and he was chasing down a oath breaker known as Malden Gower. And this is how dedicated that people in the Steel Garotte are. Like, they chased this guy down, attacked him from the shadows, wasn't able to get him down. They just continued relentlessly chasing this guy down, and even ended up choking him out and jumping off of a castle top to what would be certain death, to inflict the Strangler's justice upon him, all the while uttering this litany, Think upon your promises and die, as this person tried to kill them. And so that kind of really, I think that really gets across the radical nature behind this Paladin Order. One last thing about the Paladin Order I do want to point out is that they technically are founded from the Aedyr Empire, which is where our character is from in the game of Avowed. And so I'm interested to see if that'll actually play into the narrative of Avowed, that you have this Paladin Order that actually comes from this place. And it seems like their goals do not necessarily align with that of the Fair Konings, which is the emperor that sent you there in the first place. And we're seeing a lot of these themes and ideas and concepts and peoples and places actually kind of more often, right? Like, there's a lot of commonality and connective tissue between all these ideas. We have Inquisitor Lödwyn, who's part of the Steel Garotte, and the Steel Garotte originate in Aedyr. The Steel Garotte also follow the goddess Woedica, and the goddess Woedica is also heavily worshipped in the nation of Aedyr. In fact, I would almost go as far to say that the Church of Woedica is the state church of the Aedyran Empire. And so, in that sense, the Steel Garotte is almost like a holy and also governmental military order. Obviously, they're not. They're their own thing, but like, these things are all interconnected in different ways. And so the narrative there is going to be quite interesting, especially as you get into more of the lore of the Aedyran people, which I'm going to do a re-record on an episode for them sometime soon. So if you're hoping to learn more, I'll have an episode out soon. But episodes 4 through 6 that I already currently have, that does talk about the Aedyran people if you're more interested in that right now. But as well as you learn about people who follow Woedica and even dive into the Steel Garotte Paladin Order, even in the game itself. When you play a Steel Garotte in the second Pillars of Eternity game, as you're role-playing your character through the game, if you roleplay as a rational and cruel person, your paladin abilities will actually increase in strength because you're aligning with the faith of your order. Alternatively, in the game, if you act diplomatically or benevolent, then you will actually, some of your paladin abilities will become weaker as a result of that, because you are not aligning your behavior with that of your oath, which is an interesting mechanic. It's the disposition mechanic in Pillars of Eternity. I really like that. I don't know if they're going to include it in Avowed. Me personally, I hope that there's something like it in Avowed, but whatever, it remains to be seen. So I suppose if we run into any Steel Garotte paladins, which I suppose would be pretty easy to expect in the game of Avowed, you can expect them to be rational and cruel, but not diplomatic or benevolent. So they're not going to be open to talking with you, and they're not going to be merciful towards you. They are going to try to take you down, and they're going to do it as quickly and as efficiently as they possibly can. We don't know of a lot of other members in the Steel Garotte other than Lödwyn. We do discover another group of people, but we don't know a lot about them. There's Gulfaric, Arnfrida, Blid, Carmet, and Yonga. They are all searching for a thing called the Magistrate's Cudgel, which is a unique mace that you can find in the second Pillars of Eternity game. One thing I really like about this mace is that actually, if you read the description for it, it also encourages this idea that the Aedyr Empire and the Church of Woedica are heavily intertwined, thus supporting my idea that it is a state church, even though it's not technically said as so. If you read the item description for Magistrate's Cudgel, again, unique mace in the second Pillars game, the first section of the lore, I'm not going to read all of it, says this. Excerpt from Charter regarding the establishment of municipal domains and the appointment of their respective magisters, under the right and natural guidance of the Fair Koning, which is the name of the emperor for Aedyr, divinely appointed ruler of the empire of Aedyr and beloved of Woedica, long may he reign, penned by Quinwitha Sin Merdu, agent of the court. Let it be known that enclosed within this document bearing the seal of the beloved Fair Koning, long may he reign, is the instrument of which the document speaks. In light of the recent misguided rebellion in the Dyrwooden colony, the Imperial Ministry sees fit to coalesce the functions of the Colonial Court of Judges into a single office. Hereto, the office of the court shall, with the full authority of the Imperial Ministry, assume the rank and privileges of the magistrate of the court for a term of office to be determined by said ministry. And on it goes, just doing all this kind of legal terminology, setting up a contract basically, or a law of some sort. But the one part at the beginning saying that the Fair Koning, divinely appointed ruler of the empire, and beloved of Woedica. So they already correlate the Emperor of Aedyr to not only being the divinely appointed ruler of the empire, but they also call him the beloved of Woedica. So that just supports the idea that the Church of Woedica and the Aedyran Empire are heavily linked. And speaking of item descriptions, I do want to read a little bit from an item called the Unforgiven, which is a unique flail from the first Pillars of Eternity game. This talks a little bit more about the Steel Garotte again, and it specifically mentions their potential commission of this unique weapon for their uses. This unique flail is described as having an unknown origin. It says the origin of this item is a point of contention among the followers of Aethys and Woedica, Aethys being one of the other gods of this world, god of light and redemption, etc., etc. The Aethasians claim that their priest had it commissioned in the early aftermath of the Saints' War in hopes that it would coax their god back into the world to finish what he started. I'm not going to talk about the lore from that. It's not associated with today's episode, but that's talking about a very important event within the Pillars of Eternity history. Woedicans, on the other hand, claim that the item is older than that, an instrument of retribution against oathbreakers, originally employed by the Steel Garotte, an order of Woedican paladins devoted to the enforcement of oaths and contracts, often in mirthless fashion. So apparently, besides just using an actual Steel Garotte to choke out the oathbreakers of the world, apparently they used this unique flail called Unforgiven, which is described as having spiked balls at the end and is fashioned out of an incense burner. And when it sees vigorous use, the smell of incense blankets the area. And because of that incense, it's actually kind of become part of not a ritual, but a custom for people who made agreements that in order to frighten them into honoring their contracts, that incense would actually be introduced into negotiation rooms or bedchambers, it says here. So as a way to help encourage you to stay within your contract, people would use the incense that would be associated with this item, the Unforgiven, which was used to kill oathbreakers. So it's kind of like you're making a contract, and it's almost like they have the scent of the thing that would kill you if you don't do the thing you do, which is a really interesting way to do it, because, I mean, you got to hold people to contracts somehow, right? In our modern world, we're held to contracts legally by the actual governing structure around us. Like, if you don't obey the contract, then there will be actual consequences that the government or whatever group of people will lay against you. You know, in older times, when there wasn't maybe a governing force that cared too much, what would hold a person to a contract was like, well, if you don't fulfill your duty, we'll just kill you. Which I suppose could lead to a lot of questions of, like, why did they offer the contract in the first place if they could just force you to do it? But whatever. I know in biblical times, apparently they used to cut animals in half and then walk between the pieces, and that's how they did contracts. It was like a way of saying, hey, if I don't do the thing I did, full permission to just cut me in half like I did with this cow, or whatever the animal was. I'm not an expert, so don't quote me on that, but I heard that was kind of how they did contracts back in the day. Interesting idea. That's everything about Inquisitor Lödwyn and the Steel Garotte Paladin that they come from, and their association with the Empire of Aedyr, and their association with the goddess Woedica, both heavily involved there, and Aedyr also obviously being involved within the narrative of Avowed. I'm also expecting that Woedica might be involved with the narrative of Avowed as well. I'm always excited to see one of the gods show up in these games, because for me, that's the very interesting part. I like to see what their hands are up to and what they're doing behind the scenes, and maybe learn a little bit about the metaphysics of this world. But yeah, that's the Steel Garotte and Inquisitor Lödwyn. So now at this point, let's ask, what does this have to do with Avowed?
Is an oath worth the weight of a crown?
Well, other than the obvious, which is that Inquisitor Lödwyn is going to actually be in the game Avowed, we've seen her in the trailer, so we know that's true. And she appears to be spearheading this detachment of Steel Garotte Paladins within the Living Lands, the setting for the game of Avowed. We also know that she is going to try to push you, the player character, to try to tame or harness or use the Dream Scourge to your own advantage, I suppose, or her advantage, probably. Now, why they're over here and doing this, I don't really know, right? Because as I mentioned, the Steel Garotte, they hunt down Oathbreakers. So what is one of the higher-ups in the Steel Garotte, and obviously any followers that came with her, doing in the Living Lands, dealing with the Dream Scourge? What this has to do with a contract? Is there some ancient contract that they discovered and they found someone, or they got wind of somebody who's been alive for like thousands of years that has gone unkilled by the Steel Garotte, or has not, had the Strangler's justice brought upon them for breaking their contract, and it has something to do with the Dream Scourge? I don't know. Honestly, I'd have no idea. So I don't know why that Paladin order is here, or if their roots, or if their particular oath and personal Paladin drive has anything to do with the narrative. I really honestly don't know. There's so many other factions that Obsidian could have chosen to be in this game. I am curious as to why the Steel Garotte was chosen. Perhaps for their association with Woedica, because Woedica makes a very good antagonist. They've used her in both Pillars of Eternity games in a number of different ways, and I'm not going to dive into for spoiler reasons, but she's a very good person to pit against, even though you can align with her to some degree. So it wouldn't be surprising to see Woedica be making a return in Avowed as a player on the field, possibly in an antagonistic way, but they also needed to have a faction that was associated with her. The only other faction that exists, I can't remember what they're called. I think they're called the Champions of the Letter, and they were essentially just people who would pore through legal documents and then refuse to follow any laws that weren't properly written and recorded. They don't make for, very scary people to fight on the battlefield, whereas the Steel Garotte make for good enemies for an action RPG. So maybe that's as far as it goes. Maybe Obsidian needs Woedica, and the Steel Garotte fit that palette. But I do hope that there is an element of they are hunting down an Oathbreaker in this in some way, shape, or form. It would also be an interesting thing for you, the player character, if you are making promises to people in the game of Avowed, and then you're breaking those promises, because you're trying to get better loot or something like that. We gamers, how we game, that the Steel Garotte will then maybe increase in rank in the background of the game, the mechanics of the game, because they're going to be coming after you more. Maybe more powerful people are coming after you. So I feel like that would be an interesting way to include that mechanic, is that like if you say to an NPC, like, yeah, totally, I'm going to side with you, I'm going to get this thing, I'm going to do this thing for you, and then you turn your back on them at the last second so you can have as much of the loot as you want, or maximize your options or the story if you're someone like me, then the Steel Garotte will kind of come after you as a result. I think that would be an interesting way to include that. Otherwise, I'm not really sure. I don't know what the Steel Garotte has to do with the Dream Scourge. I think they're an interesting Paladin order and that they're associated with Woedica. It's interesting that they also have their roots in Aedyr, so probably that might be related. Maybe the Fair Coning sent the Steel Garotte over if he has the authority to do so. I don't know what their relationship is with the crown, but perhaps they went over to Living Lands in the first place, and maybe after they discovered something, they've started doing their own thing, and that's why the Fair Coning is sending you as an envoy to deal with this Dream Scourge. Maybe he thinks, well, an army of people didn't work. Perhaps one person is the better way to go. I don't know. I'm just speculating here. Those are some thoughts on what that might have to do with Avowed. I do have some other ideas, but they're kind of half-baked, so I don't want to waste your time by giving you a half-baked idea. But that being said, if anyone has any thoughts on what it is Inquisitor Lödwyn and the Steel Garotte and even the Church of Woedica and its relationship to Aedyr, if anyone has any thoughts and speculations on that, please, do a post on Reddit, send me an email, worldofeora@gmail.com, hit me up on Twitter, @worldofeora, send me ideas that you have, and I would happily, I don't have to put it on the show, but I would love to have a conversation with you about it. I love talking about games and this kind of a thing. So yeah, that's my preference there. And now's a good time as well to say that if you want to support the show, if you've been listening for a while or whatever, and you feel like, yeah, I'd like to support the show and what it's doing, you can do so at ko-fi.com/worldofeora. Don't feel any pressure like you have to do it. It's just there for people who find value in doing that kind of a thing. I'm happy to continue doing this as I am, but I thank you for any support that anyone does give. Now, let's close up today's episode. Last week, I was supposed to tell you about the game I was playing that I had finished, which was Indica. I had told you guys a while ago I was playing Indica, and then I forgot last week to bring it up again, so I'll mention that here. Before I talk about that game, I will say that I have also been playing on my phone The Case of the Golden Idol, which you can get on the Netflix app if you have a Netflix subscription, and that is a really interesting puzzle/deduction game to play. You have this screen where there's a bunch of clues, some of which don't actually matter, and some of which are very vital to figuring out the solution to each, for lack of a better word, level, where you have to fill in the blank of what happened. It starts out pretty easy, but it gets really complex really fast. I won't talk about a lot of it now because I want to talk about Indica, but yeah, it's been an adventure, so anyone who's played that game before, you know what it's like. I'm still on the first game from it, but yeah, I've been playing that on my phone. Perfect game for a phone. The other game I just started, so hopefully I can talk about next week, is Skald against the Black Priori, which is like a modernized version of old 1980s computer RPGs, like 8-bit era level stuff. I don't have a good comparison for it right now because I haven't done any research on it or talked about it or anything, so all I have to say is I played it an hour and a bit of it, and it has cured my gaming fluff that I've been in. I don't know if I mentioned it last week, can't remember. 5 days in a row, I played 1 or 2 games every single day, and every single one I bounced off of. Even some of my comfort food gamings, like Spyro the Dragon, say what you will, but that's a game from my childhood. I loaded it up and I couldn't play it. I thought, man, I'm going to have to hang up my gaming hat for a while because I just don't want to play anything. And then out of nowhere, Skald just caught my attention. I thought, you know what? I really want to try it. Maybe it's on sale. It wasn't on sale in Steam, even though everything else is. But, it's pretty affordable. So I got it, and I'm already looking forward to play it. I love that feeling when you're like, oh, I can't wait to play again. That's going to be fun. So I'm happy to have that feeling. Anyways, Indica. I finished playing the game Indica. And as a quick pitch on what Indica is this game. I played it on PlayStation 5. It is 3-dimensional. It is an adventure game with some light puzzle mechanics. You play as this nun in early 20th century Russia, and the shtick of the game is that you have the voice of the devil in your head talking to you. That's the kind of the shtick of the game. That's kind of the pitch, the thing that gets you in. And I'm not sure if Indica is a good game or not. I really cannot tell. And the reason why is because sometimes it does things from a gameplay perspective which are just not really, for lack of a better word, fun. But the game does so many other things on purpose very well that it makes me wonder if it's doing some things bad on purpose. You know how some games do that? But I can't tell if this one's doing it or not. If you go and look up Indica for reviews and stuff, there's a lot of praise given to Indica. A lot of praise by critics, not so much by a lot of the user base. And I can imagine as much because, like I said, the gameplay is a little bit lacking in Indica. But it got me all the way to the end, so there's something to say about that. Without going too long on it, I'll say things like this, that there's this wonderful, wonderful mechanic they introduce where the devil is laughing inside of your head, making fun of you, and it changes the environment around Indica, literally changes the environment around Indica. But if you pray, you hold a button and you can pray, it suppresses the voice, and then the environment goes back to its normal self. And you use this to traverse an area, like you get to an area that otherwise you couldn't get to because either it was too high or there was a locked gate or something like that. And it was really, really cool, and the atmosphere was fantastic, and I thought it was like a great thing to do in gaming. And in the entire experience, they do it 2 or 3 times, like barely at all. And I was like so upset. I'm like, man, that was so cool. You could do something really interesting with that mechanic, but they did it like twice, like, or a third time. I can't remember. It was not very often. And then there was this one puzzle I was trying to solve pretty early in the game that I was like, I'm moving this safe around and it's not going anywhere, and I can't figure out how to solve the puzzle. And then I get an achievement for knocking a piano over a few times, and I'm like, what piano are you talking about? And then it turns out there's a piano somewhere else in this building that you are trying to shake around to get to the exit of. And when you find the piano, it helps you go, oh, okay, now I know what to do, now how to do this puzzle and get out. And I'm like, okay, did they purposely make it obtuse to find the piano so that you would only discover the solution of this puzzle by getting the achievement? And the only way to get the achievement is just honestly give the puzzle an attempt a few times in a row? Like, if that was on purpose, then mwah, chef's kiss. That was a genius idea. If it wasn't on purpose, it was a really obtuse and stupid puzzle. Some of the puzzles are also just like very obstacle-y in the sense that like it's just something that they're putting in there to make it gamey, and the puzzles aren't always very good. And a lot of sections of the game are very obvious game stuff. And again, I can't tell if they're doing it on purpose or not, because Indica constantly, against this like very moody and dark setting, and you have this very soft-spoken and maligned character of Indica, you constantly have these like 8-bit video game moments where if you do something, literally an 8-bit coin will pop up in front of you and literally it sounds like that, something like that anyways, 8-bit style. You get video game points, and the game tells you these points are useless, but they give them to you anyways for doing, your good deed for the day, or good nun stuff, your Christian deed for the day, whatever it is. And it's just such a contrast to the game you're playing and the story that's being told and the characters you're meeting. And so it's really odd. And the game says it doesn't mean anything. And I'm going to, like, as far as I can tell, getting these points meant nothing. Which I think I read a critique online, not a critique, I read a critic online who was saying that it was a really interesting way of gamifying this woman's religious experience. Like, she was trying to be a very pure person. So there was this argument that perhaps she was giving herself points for doing good deeds, and as long as she didn't do anything bad, she would continue to accrue points. And so she was like trying to beat her own personal high score by gamifying her faith in a way. It was a really interesting read. But yeah, the game does have a lot to say about religion, and I will praise it there. They did a really interesting job of walking the line of not being offensive, but also being very honest. Because there was a few times where you, Indica, and another character are talking about faith and some issues that a lot of people within faith have, especially the Christian faith. And every once in a while, the conversation would go, and one person would say something that has been heard 100 times as an argument for or against faith. And I, as a player and someone who has experience in those conversations, I would roll my eyes immediately, like, oh yeah, here we go again. But then the other character would retort something that I didn't see coming, and then they would build off of that. And then the conversation between these two characters would follow and flow. And by the end of it, I didn't feel offended as a person of faith. And I also didn't feel like, oh, I'm better than you to the person's not of faith, right? Like, I felt like they walked a really good line of making both sides of this fence feel heard and valued in what they were presenting as real critiques of the way religions were, especially back then, but of faith in general. And I thought it was a really interesting game to play. That being said, dollar per hour in terms of like how much I played versus how much I spent, I don't know if me personally, if I really felt like it was worth the money I spent. It was very short, and despite being very interesting, yeah, I don't know what else to say. Anyways, I think I've gone on way too long. Sorry about that. It was a weird experience. I don't know if it's a good game. I liked what it was doing, though, even if I don't know if the execution was great. Again, the gameplay parts were not the best. The giant tuna cans that you have to try to traverse. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm done. I'm not going to talk about it anymore. If that sounds like something interesting to you, go ahead and check it out. Again, maybe wait until it's on sale if you're someone like me, but regardless. Thanks everyone for listening to today's episode about Inquisitor Lödwyn and the Steel Garotte, Paladin Order, Woedica, and Aedyr. Mostly about the Steel Garotte, a little bit about Inquisitor Lödwyn. We just don't know a lot about her. But thanks everyone for listening to today's episode. I've been your host, Eric, aka Gingerino, and I'll see you guys next time.